So I wrote my first computer program when I was 7 years old to add up the integers from 1 to 100, and I got the right answer, and I was very excited about that. And then I started writing all sorts of stuff, and obviously, when I first started programming, I was very naive. There was a lot of copy and paste. It made the programs really long. I didn't really think about how to make good use of loops and all that. And so 20 megabytes went really quickly. And on top of that, a lot of my programs crashed the RAM because they tried to use way too much memory, because I was writing them very naively, almost like one statement at a time, like linear, sometimes spaghetti code even. And I never thought you could program chess, though. That was more recent that I even gave that any thought. That was at least when I was in college. Some of the earlier programs I ever wrote were drawing things on the screen. I think when I started learning a little bit about math, I started to plot equations on the screen, like a graphing calculator, because I knew how to plot XY points on the screen, and all I had to do was set Y equal to whatever of X, and then I could plot the screen, so I could plot sines and cosines and all that. And I wrote my first computer game when I was 9 years old, actually. I wrote Tic-Tac-Toe. But I wrote it in a very naive way. If the board is this, make this move. If the board is that, make that move. And the code was, I think, several megabytes long, because it was copy and paste. Check all these conditions. Does the board look like this? Check that condition. Does the board look like that? And, yeah. When I was 11 years old, my family and I took a flight to Taiwan. My grandparents are from Taiwan. And we flew on EVA Airlines, and that year they had introduced new software to the plane, and they would track where you were on the ground. They would track this map of the Earth and where you were, and estimated of how much time it would take to get there, what the current local time was. And I was fascinated with that program. When I got home, I programmed something like that, basically to track. I went online to read about where the wind speed would be at various points, and I wrote a program to track where one might be when they take a flight. And I read about the different time zones around the Earth, and that was that. And I did a lot of, it wasn't really a simulation, because it didn't show you a plane with, what you saw in the window, but it was at least a simulation of where you were for flying. But shortly after that, we had 9/11, and I had a big fear of flying as a result, and I didn't fly for 7 years, actually. And I got over my fear of flying during my time working on my PhD program. Part of the reason I got over my fear of flying is that I had a bad relationship with a girl I was dating here in the United States. Actually, two of them. One in high school and one at the beginning of my PhD program. And at the same time, I was watching American Idol Season 3, and I really liked Jasmine Trias. She's from the Philippines, and she got, I think, third or fourth place on American Idol 3. And then later that year, Kelly Clarkson was competing in World Idol. She was competing against idols from 9 or 10 other countries around the world. It was the first time we had an international talent show. And I got fascinated with two other girls from other countries. And then you add that to the fact that I had so much difficulty with American girls here. I wanted to meet somebody from outside the country, and I had to fly. And so the first flight I took after I got over my fear of flying, we had a conference in Italy when I was working on my PhD. And I had to fly from Rochester to Washington, D.C. first. That is only the third time in my life I've ever successfully stacked 32 chess pieces. I've tried this many times when I was a kid, And I remember being really frustrated because 32 doesn't sound like a whole lot of paces. And I keep telling myself I got to get another chess set just like this one so I can stack 64, but I never get around to it. I think I bought this set in Taiwan, and I just haven't. Every time I go to Taiwan, other things come to mind, and I just never pick up another set so I could do that. Anyways, so I got over my fear of flying, and I went to Italy for a conference. And I had to fly from Rochester to Washington D.C. Dulles Airport. And I got on the flight, and as soon as I sat down, I was like, "Oh my God, what am I committing to?" And I almost wanted to get off. I was looking at the front door, and the captain had kept it open, and I was like, "Oh my God, should I get off? Should I get off?" And then the door closed, and it was too late. And I remember when the door closed, I almost had a heart attack. And then I started talking to the flight attendant, and I explained how I hadn't flown in a number of years, and 9/11, and the Columbia, just Space Shuttle Columbia. And then I looked next to me, and there was this mother and her son. The son was maybe 5 or 6 years old, and I thought it wasn't really appropriate to be talking about that on an airplane next to a kid, so I decided to talk about other things. And before I knew it, the plane had taken off. We were at cruising altitude. I was still talking about other things, and I forgot I was flying, so that was good. That was good. And then I got to Dulles, and then I realized that it would be my first time over the Atlantic Ocean. I've always flown over the Pacific Ocean. Even in the past when I went to Europe, I think I took a flight over the Pacific Ocean first. I went the long way, so it'd be my first time over the Atlantic. And it seemed more like an adventure for me at that point, and I just got over the concept of fear. So that was good. I'm so glad that first leg, I sat next to the kid, and I really embarrassed myself. I was like, oh my God, why am I talking about 9/11 in Colombia next to a kid right before we're going to fly? I have a bad habit of doing that. Sometimes when I get on the plane, the first thing I want to do is to watch air crash investigation. I don't know why every time I fly, I want to watch stuff like that. I don't have fear anymore, but it's so weird. Every time I'm traveling, I start to think about that. Anyways, so I got over the fear of flying, and just the other day, when I flew to, last month when I went to Macau for the ICGA conference, I looked at my frequent flyer miles, and I discovered that since getting over my fear of flying, I have flown a lunar distance, so 248,000 miles. I go to a lot of these conferences. I've been competing since 2013, and then in between that, I go to visit my friend in Rochester, and then sometimes I visit another friend in Warsaw. Usually I take the bus though, because I had 3 years in a row we had the conference in Amsterdam, and one time I flew to Warsaw from there, but the other 2 times I took the train and a bus. And where else have I flown? Obviously, sometimes I go to Taiwan just to see my family, and then I have family in Pittsburgh. Although I like to drive. Driving is kind of a holdover pastime from my time when I was afraid of flying. So when I was working on my PhD, my parents were in Pittsburgh, I was in Rochester, and I would drive home. And it's kind of a holdover. I've kind of developed a passion for long distance drives as a result. I don't really fear flying anymore. I see flying as more of an inconvenience. I mean, if it's a short distance, like from Rochester to Pittsburgh, and you think about how much time you have to spend going through security and how much time you have to, not to mention it's on somebody else's timetable now, it doesn't really make sense anymore to fly. I mean, so it's more like that. Even I would say from Seattle, if I'm going to, I would have to go to at least Chicago before I would think about flying. If I'm going to, let's say, Yellowstone National Park, which I love, or going to San Francisco, I have some friends down in Silicon Valley, I tend to think of those as driving distances. Or if I'm going to if I'm going to Vancouver. Well, I guess I've flown to Vancouver before, but that was because it was part of a longer trip. Sometimes I go to Vancouver to fly to Taiwan or to Europe, but I would never fly to Vancouver as a standalone trip. It just doesn't really make any sense to me. And so, and plus, I just love driving because when I was a kid, driving was one of the few times I would spend time with my family, and well, and sometimes when I drive very long distances and I need to stay awake, I eat a lot of chocolate. So it's kind of, my chocolate addiction is kind of intertwined with my driving addiction, if you will. It's kind of like how some people just need a cigarette when they drive or coffee. For me, it's chocolate. And I used to have a friend who drank beer while he was driving, and he wasn't totally wasted, but he did, for some reason, the two activities just got intertwined with one another. And so for me, it's just a lot of fun times together. So Chinese chess, I hope to get to that soon. Oh yeah, another thing about my travels is that I have some thoughts about where I want my ashes to go after I die. It's in another country. And I was, earlier this year when I was flying to Macau, and I was looking at the arrival ticket that you had to fill out, and they asked you for your purpose of your trip. And obviously there's business, there's sightseeing, there's family, but there's no box for, I'm terminally ill and I'm coming here to die so I can be buried here. That's kind of one reason why I might want to travel someday. And I wonder what would happen if you went up to the immigration counter. Oh, purpose of your trip, I'm here to die and be buried. I have terminal cancer and I have 2 months to live and I want my remains to stay here. I wonder what would... I guess one way around that is if I do marry somebody from that country and gain her citizenship, but from the looks of it, I'm not going to be doing that. So, I don't know. I'll just go there to sightsee. I mean, dying can be part of sightseeing, right? I could die there and sightsee for the next 5 billion years before the sun swallows the earth. Oh yeah, one more thing I want to try. After you make a stack of Chinese chess pieces, sometimes you can take one and knock out the bottom piece and the whole tower will stay intact. So we'll give that a try. I've never gotten it to work with 32, but smaller ones I have. Alright. See, with a smaller tower, I can show you what happens. Thanks for watching.